Welcome to Module 1, Research Fundamentals and Philosophy of Science. Today we're focusing on Lesson 3, the concept of research paradigms. This crucial topic will help you understand the foundational worldviews that shape how research is conducted across disciplines. By the end of this session, you'll be able to accomplish these key objectives. First, you'll define what constitutes a research paradigm. Second, you'll explain how paradigms shape both research questions and methods. And third, you'll identify the components that make up a research paradigm. Understanding these concepts will give you powerful tools for analyzing and designing research. So, what exactly are research paradigms? At their core, paradigms are shared worldviews that guide inquiry. They represent collective beliefs, values, and assumptions about reality and knowledge that research communities hold. These paradigms aren't just abstract concepts. They actively shape the questions researchers ask and the methods they choose to answer them. Think of paradigms as lenses through which researchers understand phenomena. Just as colored glasses tint everything you see, a research paradigm influences how researchers perceive and interpret the world around them. So, what exactly are research paradigms? At their core, paradigms are shared worldviews that guide inquiry. They represent collective beliefs, values, and assumptions about reality and knowledge that research communities hold. These paradigms aren't just abstract concepts. They actively shape the questions researchers ask and the methods they choose to answer them. Think of paradigms as lenses through which researchers understand phenomena. Just as colored glasses tint everything you see, a research paradigm influences how researchers perceive and interpret the world around them. You might wonder why it's important to understand paradigms. First, they profoundly influence the research questions we ask and the methods we choose. A researcher working within a positivist paradigm might ask, "What causes X?" while someone in an interpretivist paradigm might ask, "How do people experience X?" Second, paradigms guide how we evaluate evidence and communicate findings. Third, they define what counts as a contribution to knowledge and how we assess quality. Perhaps most importantly, understanding paradigms enables more intentional and transparent inquiry. When you're aware of your paradigmatic assumptions, you can make more deliberate choices about your research approach. Research paradigms have these main components that work together as an integrated system. Ontology addresses the nature of reality, what exists and in what form. Epistemology concerns the nature of knowledge, how we can know what we claim to know. Methodology refers to the approach to inquiry, the specific strategies and techniques for collecting and analyzing evidence. And axiology deals with the role of values in research, how researchers' values influence the inquiry process. So let's explore each of these components in more detail. Ontology asks the fundamental question, what is the nature of reality? Different paradigms offer different answers. Realism holds that reality exists independently of our perceptions. There is an objective world out there waiting to be discovered. Critical realism acknowledges an independent reality, but recognizes that it's imperfectly knowable through our limited human faculties. At the other end of the spectrum, relativism suggests that reality is constructed through human interaction, meaning that multiple realities can exist simultaneously, shaped by different cultural, historical, and social contexts. Epistemology addresses how we can know what we know. Objectivism asserts that knowledge is discovered through neutral observation of an external reality. This view sees the researcher as separate from what is being researched. Constructionism, in contrast, holds that knowledge is created through interpretation of our experiences and interactions. Subjectivism goes further, suggesting that knowledge is individually constructed and imposed on the object of study. Your epistemological stance directly influences what you consider valid evidence and how you position yourself as a researcher. Methodology refers to how we should study the world. This includes experimental approaches that test hypotheses through controlled manipulation, dialogic methods that seek understanding through conversation, interpretive techniques that analyze meanings, and participatory approaches that involve stakeholders in the research process. Importantly, your methodology should be determined by your ontological and epistemological stances. There should be logical consistency across these components. For instance, if you believe reality is socially constructed, experimental methods alone would be insufficient. Axiology asks whether research can be value-free. Those who take a value-neutral position believe researchers should exclude their values from the research process to avoid bias. Those with a value-conscious stance acknowledge that values inevitably influence research, but suggest we should be transparent about them. The value-centered perspective argues that values are essential to inquiry. They guide what we choose to study and how we interpret findings. Your axiological position affects how you approach objectivity and whose interests your research serves. For a research paradigm to be robust, its components must align in a logical way. Ontology informs epistemology, which shapes methodology, which is influenced by axiology. For example, if you hold a relativist ontology, multiple constructed realities, this naturally pairs with a constructionist epistemology. Knowledge is created through interpretation, which leads to interpretive methodologies, seeking to understand meanings, and typically a value-conscious or value-centered axiology. Inconsistencies between these components can undermine the coherence and credibility of your research approach. Paradigms aren't just abstract philosophical concepts. They concretely shape every aspect of research practice. They guide how we formulate research questions, design studies, collect and analyze data, and draw conclusions. They also define what counts as quality research and how findings should be communicated. A researcher working within a positivist paradigm might prioritize reliability, validity, and generalizability, while someone in an interpretivist paradigm might emphasize authenticity, trustworthiness, and transferability. Let's consider how different paradigms would approach research on teaching effectiveness. A researcher operating from a positivist paradigm might conduct quantitative comparisons of teaching methods using standardized tests as outcome measures. They might ask, which teaching method produces the highest test scores? In contrast, a researcher working within an interpretivist paradigm might conduct qualitative interviews to understand how different stakeholders experience various teaching approaches. Their question might be, how do students and teachers experience different pedagogical methods in this particular context? Similarly, in health research, the biomedical paradigm typically emphasizes clinical trials, focuses on physiological mechanisms, and aims for generalizability across populations. A researcher in this tradition might ask, what is the average effect of this medication on blood pressure? The biopsychosocial paradigm would likely use mixed methods to develop a more holistic understanding, recognizing that health involves biological, psychological, and social dimensions. Their question might be, how do biological, psychological, and social factors interact to influence this health condition? Kuhn described how scientific fields evolve through paradigm shifts. First, there's a period of normal science where researchers work within an established paradigm. Eventually, anomalies accumulate, findings that can't be explained within the current framework. This leads to crisis, followed by scientific revolution, where a new paradigm emerges. Finally, a new normal is established. A classic example is the shift from Newtonian to Einsteinian physics, where phenomena at very high speeds or strong gravitational fields couldn't be explained by Newton's laws, leading to Einstein's theories of relativity. Paradigm shifts don't happen easily. A few factors are needed to create the necessary resistance. First, researchers develop professional identities and invest in tools tied to particular paradigms. Second, academic reward systems often reinforce dominant paradigms through publication preferences, funding decisions, and promotion criteria. Third, power dynamics within disciplines can marginalize alternative approaches. Finally, different paradigms can be incommensurable. They use different language and standards that make direct comparison difficult. This is why paradigm changes often require generational shifts in scientific communities. The contemporary view recognizes that multiple paradigms can productively coexist. Different paradigms reveal different aspects of phenomena, much like different lenses help us see different features of an object. Complex problems, like climate change or health disparities, benefit from diverse perspectives working in complementary ways. This doesn't mean anything goes. Rather, it acknowledges that different questions require different approaches, and that knowledge advances through multiple forms of inquiry. In upcoming lessons, we'll explore major research paradigms in depth. We'll look at positivism and post-positivism, which emphasize objective reality and empirical testing. We'll examine interpretivism and constructivism, which focus on meanings and social construction. We'll explore critical and transformative paradigms, which address power and social change. And we'll discuss pragmatism and mixed methods, which prioritize what works to address research problems rather than philosophical purity. As we conclude, consider these reflection questions. What paradigms have you observed in your field? How do they shape what counts as legitimate research? Have you witnessed resistance to alternative paradigmatic approaches? How conscious are you of your own assumptions about reality, knowledge, methodology, and values? Which paradigm components challenge your thinking the most? Take time to reflect on these questions, as they'll help you develop a more nuanced understanding of research paradigms and your own position as a researcher.